Hello guys, yesterday in my video I talked about how the Freedom Front wants to cut the cabinet in South Africa, the cabinet in government, which is possibly the best thing that the party of their size can do and can lobby for and is possible to achieve, except for preventing the disastrous Zimbabwean-style takeover of land with expropriation without compensation. Now, unlucky for South Africa, the Freedom Front Plus, with their 2.5% support or 10 out of 400 members of parliament, is the only real capitalist party left in parliament in South Africa. The DA was once a capitalist party, but they have given that up a long time ago and have moved to the left to democratic socialism. Now, luckily the DA will hopefully still oppose the bill to change the constitution in order to take away any farmer's land without compensation, even though they do still support this so-called land redistribution. They still support the socialist notion that these farms needs to be taken away from the farmers, as explained by the leader of the Democratic Alliance right here.
Policy, we are not going backwards, and we are saying if you work in a farm, you must own in that farm. Therefore, as the DA, we are standing strong.
Now, in this video, I want to focus on how the cutting of the cabinet of ministers to possibly 18 or 16 members from the current more than 60 members in cabinet. I don't know if the cuts will include only the ministers or the vice ministers as well, but how any cut in government in South Africa will be the best thing that can possibly happen and that can possibly be achieved by a small capitalist party like the Freedom Front Plus if they lobby for it. To do that, I'm going to compare South Africa, the size of our government, the amount of employees our government has in the top positions like the Cabinet of Ministers and their salaries to those of a country like the United States of America. But before we do that, if you're interested in South Africa and you want to learn more about it, on this channel we analyze events happening in South Africa, so be sure to subscribe. Also, if you wish to receive regular updates from us on WhatsApp, be sure to send your name and preferred language on WhatsApp to +27 71 567 7162. So before we even start to look at the comparison between the amount of government employees and their salaries between South Africa and the United States, let's first take a look at the size of the two countries. We can measure that in two things: size of the population and size of the economy. Population-wise, the population of America is 330 million, while South Africa is about 55 million. Thus, South Africa is population-wise 6 times smaller than the United States of America. Economy-wise, the total GDP nominal of the United States of America is 21 trillion. The total nominal GDP of South Africa is 400 billion. Thus, we can see that the total economy of the United States of America is exactly 52.5 times bigger than South Africa. Now let's jump into the comparisons. The total cabinet size of the American federal government is 15. The total cabinet size of the South African government is 67. Now let's look at the pay of the members of the cabinet. Now the American cabinet consists out of people called secretaries, which is the equivalent of the South African ministers. So the salary of a secretary in the United States that I found was roughly $150,000 per annum. That translates to about 2.15 million rands in South Africa. The minister's salary in South Africa is $170,000 or 2.4 million rands. Slightly higher than the Americans. Now here it is also very significant to note the fact that the secretaries in the United States of America are professionals in their jobs. For example, the Secretary of Agriculture in America will be an agricultural expert. While in South Africa, with the frequent cabinet reshuffles that we are seeing, we know that the people who are ministers of anything are not professional in that field. They are just some politician that is appointed to the possible highest office that it can be appointed to because of his political affiliations. Now let's look at the representatives. In South Africa we call it the House of Parliament. In America they call it the House of Representatives. America, which is a country 6 times larger than South Africa population-wise and 53 times larger economically-wise, they have 538 representatives compared to South Africa's 400 representatives. Representatives in America are paid roughly $150,000 per annum, which of course is 2.15 million rands. The representatives in South Africa, on the other hand, gets paid $80,000 per annum, which is 1.1 million rands in South Africa. So just more than half the pay that they get. It is, however, very important to note that the buying power in South Africa is much higher than that in the USA. Everything is much more expensive there. A rand in South Africa goes much further than a dollar goes in a state like New York, for example. And to that we are getting right now while we're comparing the average salary of a citizen in the country to the average salary of these government employees. But first, let's look at the top 10 highest paid presidents in the world, where Cyril Ramaphosa of South Africa sits tightly at number 6, just above Angela Merkel, the head of state of Germany, and Justin Trudeau, the head of state of Canada, and just below Donald Trump, the president of the United States. For a country the size of South Africa, both economically and population-wise, this is a total disaster. So let's jump into the comparison between government officials and average citizens in South Africa. Now, the pay of the average citizen in America and South Africa that I'm showing to you now is the pay of the average employed citizen in that country. So this doesn't take into account unemployed people or poor people who don't have jobs or can't work or whatever, because we know that South Africa's unemployment is sky high, with more than a third of all people and more than half of all youths being unemployed. So this is just for the average working person. The average citizen that's working in the United States get paid $60,000 per annum, which translates to 820,000 rands in South Africa. The average South African working citizen gets paid $17,000 per annum, which is 240,000 rands. Now let's compare that pay to different government officials. Firstly, the president. The president of the United States gets paid 7 times more than the average citizen who is working in the United States. The president of South Africa, on the other hand, gets paid 18 times more. The average secretary in the United States, which is the equivalent of the South African minister, gets paid 2.5 times more than the average citizen of South Africa, while ministers in South Africa gets paid exactly 10 times more than the average citizen in South Africa. The representatives in the House of Representatives in the US gets paid 3 times more than the average citizen, while the average representative in South Africa gets paid 5 times more. Now, the idea that comes from the Freedom Front's election manifesto, which I hope they can be able to lobby through and to get through to government and to get Cyril Ramaphosa to do so, is to cut on the cabinet of ministers. If this happens, it will be a huge win for South Africa and a huge win for the Freedom Front Plus politically as well, because this will mean that South Africa will save a lot of unnecessary money, which is currently wasted on a buddy-buddy system of politicians giving each other jobs that they aren't even able to do. It will also be great for the economy of South Africa to stop wasting money on jobs that really doesn't matter in South Africa, on unnecessary jobs at the highest levels in South Africa, because the 2.4 million rand salary that the ministers get is only a small part of all the money being wasted on the cabinet. These ministers use up much more government money on other things like housing, security, flights, food, etc., than just their massive salaries. So again, as I said, I hope that the Freedom Front will be able to lobby the government to have less ministers in cabinet. And I have to be optimistic to say that there is a possibility that they'll be able to do it. And let's be optimistic about it. That's about all. Thank you, goodbye, and God bless you.